Heteronormativity. First, I'll start by defining heteronormativity, followed by looking at what the ideal relationship of today looks like. Then, I'll go through how heteronormativity is taught, focusing on the media, mothers, and essentialism. Then I'll dive deeper into the media by looking at how Disney perpetuates heteronormativity. I'll take a look at gender inequality. After that, I'll talk about Schulten Westbrook's study about being transgender in the workplace and how being transgender fits or doesn't fit into the heteronormative society. And finally, I'll look at the consequences of heteronormativity, which impacts LGBTQ youth and their mental health. So, heteronormativity is defined by Karen Martin as the mundane, everyday ways that heterosexuality is privileged and taken for granted as normal and natural. Schulten Westbrook included in their definition that heteronormativity is involved in the culture, legal system, and institutions to maintain that there are two and only two genders, that gender reflects biological sex, and only sexual attraction between opposite genders is natural and accepted. This definition seems to include elements of essentialism, which I'll get into later. It's also important to note that heteronormativity doesn't just encompass heterosexuality, but also focuses on the gender binary, trying to keep it a binary, and contributes to gender inequality. Then we have the ideal relationship of today, which is still considered heterosexual, as a relationship is still supposed to be procreative. Then we have monogamous, the idea of one and only one partner. Relationships are also supposed to be long-lasting, or in other words, they will eventually lead to marriage. And finally, we still see marriages typically of the same social class. Heteronormativity is taught by preschool teachers or daycare workers, the media, especially during a time where children are growing up constantly surrounded by screens, parents, but mostly mothers, essentialism, and religion. The media, especially aimed at young girls, focuses on romantic heterosexual relationships. Little girls are constantly shown films and shows where the main character finds their own Prince Charming and gets married at the end. Disney also portrays love as powerful, something that they should want way more than their same-gendered friendships. In the media, there is a lack of LGBTQ characters, and the media depicts what is normal and at the same time makes sure that children understand and reproduce heteronormativity later in life. And then we have parents. Predominantly mothers pass down what they were taught onto their children, forever passing down heteronormativity from generation to generation. Parents also link gender with sexuality regarding their young children. From birth, the child is assumed to be heterosexual, and any non-normative gender behavior is automatically perceived as homosexual, even though gender behavior and sexuality are two separate things. Children are also taught that anything deviating from the ideal relationship described from earlier is dangerous. So any relationship that doesn't lead to marriage, that doesn't lead to kids, that is same-sex, and is not monogamous is forbidden. Parents also tend to exaggerate opposite-gendered friendships to make them out to be boyfriend and girlfriend or that they have crushes on each other, no matter how young they are. Parents are one of the main suspects in perpetuating heteronormativity as they apply it to their children as soon as they are born. Mothers are the ones who bring up marriage with their children, mainly their daughters. They talk about marriage often and show their children their wedding videos. Falling in love is often mentioned synonymously with marriage and is always talked about with the opposite gender. Because it is mentioned so often, children often feel that they will get married someday. It's not just an option. Parents also tend to leave out anything LGBTQ related. Ignorance is bliss. And then we have essentialism. Essentialism enforces the gender and sexual orientation binary and believes that the body determines sex, sex determines gender, and that gender determines sexual orientation. Anything that violates the binaries or having a different gender identity that doesn't agree with biological sex is not accepted under essentialism. Essentialism also enforces certain ways in how to be a man and how to be a woman, so any way of portraying gender that doesn't fit into the typical behaviors is also not accepted. Since essentialism focuses on biological or natural reproduction, procreative relationships are the only accepted ones. Finally, the belief that the body determines gender and that gender cannot be changed completely disregards those that identify as transgender and leads to discrimination that they face. Children as young as 3 are taught heteronormativity through the movies and shows that they watch, especially Disney. Martin and Kaziak looked at 20 films in their study, and only 2 do not have any reference to heterosexual relationships, have a heterosexual relationship in the major or minor plot, have any sexiness, or have any ogling at women's bodies. The 2 that were excluded from any heterosexual reference were The Polar Express, a Christmas movie, and The Rugrats movie, a movie about babies. Out of the 20 children's movies, half of them included some ogling at women's bodies, and 18 out of 20 included references to heterosexual relationships. Opposite gender friendships include characters that are smaller than the main love interest and are often portrayed as animals to show that the relationship that they have isn't suited for a romantic relationship. This seems to imply that the friend zone should never be breached because their relationship cannot possibly blossom into something deeper than strictly friends. Same-sex friendships are hardly ever represented between women, except for maternal figures, and again are either objects or animals. Pocahontas is an example between Pocahontas and her grandmother Willow, who was a tree. Here in The Little Mermaid, we see Ariel's friend Flounder portrayed as a cute little fish, whereas her love interest is a human prince. In Disney movies, love is portrayed as magical, exceptional, and transformative. By depicting love as magical, it becomes so desirable for these young kids to obtain it later in life. Love is also shown as above the law or outside the control of society. Since these characters will go out of their way for love, it makes it even more desirable. Referenced in Straight from Class, Han Blank points out that heterosexual romance is necessary for a happy ending. Children can then interpret this as that they won't be happy later in life unless they are married to the opposite gender. Besides mostly being damsels in distress, women's nudity is shown significantly more than men's and is more sacred. As Martin and Kaziak analyzed, women are often walked in on when they are changing, and as they are trying to cover up, men are supposed to look away. Martin and Kaziak picked up on the significance of a scene like this in The Hunchback of Notre Dame, when Quasimodo walked in on Esmeralda, and as she tried to cover up, Quasimodo quickly looks away, but obviously gets in a glance as he is shown to smile. Martin and Kaziak argue that this smile symbolizes that Esmeralda's body made her even more lovable and desired than just her personality. While women are often shown trying to cover up if they are walked in on, men's bodies are often the source of jokes when they are mentioned, usually about what is below the belt. A few years ago, the remake of Beauty and the Beast involved presenting LeFou as gay. There was a lot of parental backlash at the portrayal of a gay character. However, what makes it okay to expose children to heterosexuality as opposed to homosexuality? The answer, heteronormativity. Heteronormativity also perpetuates gender inequality. From Adam, Eve, and the serpent, there's an argument that Eve was made out of Adam for Adam. Therefore, wives should be submissive to their husbands and within the church. This is an early example of how heteronormativity contributes to gender inequality. Masculinity is also valued more than femininity. In class, we discussed how tomboys are more accepted than feminine boys. This perpetuates so that it is more okay to be masculine than to be feminine. Chilton Westbrook, who looked at transgender men and their transition in their workplace, also found that they were more accepted as men than they were as women. Heteronormativity assumes gender at birth and that it is the same gender as one's sex, which is determined by genitals. Chilton Westbrook looked at men who transitioned in the workplace. They found that transgender men are moved into jobs that are more fitting towards their newfound masculinity. Other men are very accepting of them and encourage them to openly talk about their desire for women, which assumes that they are now considered heterosexual. And regarding moving them into masculine jobs, some are even rehired as men to steer them towards a man's career track, whatever that means. In the workplace, they go from being seen as non-conforming women who are often thought to be lesbians to gender-conforming men who are now heterosexual. Men are the ones with this viewpoint, as women accept transgender men only in workplace contexts, not in any sexual way. Women ask them to do masculine things around the office, such as moving boxes or killing spiders. However, in any type of sexual or relationship situation, women view them as biological females passing as men. Some even view transgender men as trying to trick them into homosexuality. Because the transgender men were only accepted after their transition, where they were perceived to be conforming men, this shows that being a heterosexual man is more accepted than being a lesbian. Since before the transition, they were assumed to be lesbian, although there wasn't any information given on how many actually were. This is also problematic as it assumes their sexuality before and after their transition. The importance of changing the effect heteronormativity has in society involves improving the mental health of LGBTQ youth. The effect of heteronormativity on LGBTQ community is that they are 3 times more likely to have mental health disorders than non-LGBTQ. This can come from the fear of coming out, the fear of being discriminated against, and the lack of representation in the media. The most common mental health disorders, according to NAMI, among LGBTQ are anxiety, post-traumatic stress disorder, depression, thoughts of suicide, and substance abuse. Suicide is the leading cause of death for LGBTQ between the ages of 10 and 24. LGBTQ youth are 4 times more likely, and questioned youth are 3 times more likely to attempt suicide, have suicidal thoughts, or engage in self-harm. The effect that heteronormativity has on LGBTQ youth and adults is devastating. In 2018, they are still facing backlash for who they are, and it was only 3 years ago in 2015 that same-sex marriage was legalized in all of the United States. Throughout the world, same-sex marriage is still illegal in a majority of countries. LGBTQ have staggering higher rates of mental health disorders and thoughts of suicide, which can be contributed to the fear of coming out and being accepted by society. They have little to no representation in the media while growing up in a media-dominated society. Heteronormativity degrades femininity and rewards masculinity, contributing to the gender imbalance and to the patriarchy. Before transitioning, trans men are viewed as lesbians and not accepted. However, after transitioning, they are more accepted and seen as heterosexual. The Schulten Westbrook studies show that being a heterosexual male is more accepted and rewarded in society. Children's movies push heterosexuality, and when characters with other sexualities are proposed, they are met with backlash. Society has a problem with displaying homosexuality while never questioning why we have to push heterosexuality in the first place. If heterosexuality is normalized in children's movies, so should all other forms of sexualities. The backlash of LGBTQ representation in the media has to be eliminated. The statistics on LGBTQ youth mental health show the effect of growing up in a society that tells you who you are and who you like is wrong because you aren't a heterosexual that identifies as the same gender given to you at birth. The presence of all sexualities and genders in the media can lead to the end of assuming sexuality and gender. As a society, we also need to change the stereotypes on relationships. The ideal relationship today is heterosexual. Even Googling relationships or images for my presentation, the first page of searches was filled with white heterosexual couples. In conclusion, heteronormativity doesn't just involve heterosexuality, but encompasses gender and the ideal relationship. Children as young as 3 learn heteronormativity predominantly through the media and their parents. Disney movies are a main culprit in pushing heterosexuality onto children, but when they introduced a homosexual character, the company was met with backlash by parents. Transgender men are more accepted as men and assumed to be heterosexual than when they were women who are assumed to be lesbians. And finally, heteronormativity drastically affects the mental health of LGBTQ youth.